Rebecca, and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I have some of the similar experience to Melissa and Lauren, that I'm a teacher of English as a foreign language, and I'm a teacher of Spanish. And I've got quite a few years experience teaching in Latin America and in Trinidad and Tobago. And right now I'm also teaching online to students in China. And one of the things that, I could mention that I first became aware of Voces when I started using their material, Nuestra Historia, with my Spanish students. And I just loved it from the very beginning. And so it's really exciting for me to be sort of putting a lot of those things that I like about Voces into an EFL program. So Erin mentioned that I've been involved with quite a lot of the material, all the time thinking from the point of view of the teacher and the learner, what's going to help them in the classroom, what's going to help the teacher, and what's going to help the learner. And one of the things that I loved about Voces is the way that the culture is integrated into the lessons and into the curriculum. And because it's a way for the students to connect with the language, to engage them, to inspire them. It's just a fantastic way for them to really want to learn the language. And English is such a diverse, the English-speaking world is so diverse that there's so much opportunity to expose students to different cultures that they may not know about. So that's like one of my passions. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the integrated performance assessment and what are the benefits in the language classroom. And I'm going to walk you through some of the performance assessments in Storyscape, most of which I wrote myself, and some tips for how you can successfully implement them in your classrooms. And then how you could create your own IPAs and how you can use authentic material more effectively in the classroom, because that authentic material is what's going to bring the language alive. The stories that Lauren talked about, and also the authentic material. So what exactly is an integrated performance assessment? Well, assessment obviously is something that's going to evaluate the students' skills. And in traditional language teaching, you would have, at the end of a learning cycle, you would have maybe a listening test, a reading test, writing, speaking. So you might have any combination of those. You might have a vocabulary test, a grammar test, but these might not necessarily be contextualized, and they might not necessarily be linked in any way. And they may be more or less communicative. With the integrated performance assessment, the focus is on a real-world communication scenario. And this type of assessment will always have at least 3 tasks which are linked. And if we think about our students, we can it's easy to see that this type of real-world communicative assessment is going to mean a lot more to them than individualized skills tests. So from the point of view, we can think of the benefits from the point of view of a student. So they're going to be that much more engaged in the assessment. So it's not going to be like a boring test. It's going to be something engaging because it's real. It's something that they can see that they might have to do in the real world. Then from the point of view of the teacher, it's also really beneficial because it shows when you have that type of assessment, it means that you value communication and that transmits to your students. It also means that you will have to focus on those skills and build those skills throughout your curriculum. So it does help you to create a more purposeful and meaningful curriculum for students. So from the student's point of view and from the teacher's point of view. So if we go more deeply into what is an integrated performance assessment. So this was a model that was developed by ACTFL, the American Council for Teachers of Foreign Languages. And this evaluates a student's communication skills in 3 modes of communication in a real-world scenario. Each task leads to the next by providing the information required or setting up the interaction. So you would have 3 types of task. The first task is usually interpretive, like a listening comprehension or reading comprehension. The second task and third task would be presentational and interpersonal. So these could be, you could have them in any order. The presentational task could be speaking or writing, but it's one-way communication. Interpersonal task, speaking or writing, it involves interaction. So if we look at some examples, so comprehension or interpretive tasks like a promotional video, a TV commercial, an announcement, a movie clip, a reading. Interpretive task could be a menu, a web page, a recipe, an email. So one thing which is connecting all of these tasks is you can see that they're authentic. So they're not test for the purpose of a test. They have a real purpose and a real audience. Presentational tasks. You can have a lecture or a talk. If it's speaking, writing, write an essay, write an email, write a story, write an invitation, a blog. So any writing that has a purpose and has an audience. The interpersonal task involves interaction. A speaking task could be to order a meal, request information, ask for directions, make a purchase, conversation. Interpersonal task writing is when the student has to reply. So a series of text messages, an email that they must read and reply. So these are the types of tasks which make up an integrated performance task. But what's important is that these three tasks connect to each other. So I'll show you where you can find that in our Storyscape. If you go to the menu, I'm showing you an example from Unit 2. Unit 2 assessments. Each unit has 4 types of assessment: a grammar assessment and vocabulary assessment, like Erin mentioned. These are more traditional. A free write, which is a completely open-ended writing assignment, and the integrated performance assessment. So if we look a little closer, this is from Unit 2. We can see that the integrated performance assessment, or IPA, has 4 parts. It has a context, then it has 3 tasks: an interpretive task, an interpersonal task, and a presentational task. In the case of Unit 2, it's an interpretive reading followed by an interpersonal writing, followed by a presentational speaking. So we delve deeper. So you can do the tasks on different days, but they must be completed in the same order. So you can't change the order because each one leads into the next. If we delve deeper into the task, we will see that there's always a context. For example, you're going to Canada for 1 month on a student exchange. You're very excited and you want to get to know the school and your classmates. And you'll notice that there's a Spanish and an English instructions in Spanish and English. So right away, this is going to put the student into the situation. So this is very important because it's going to explain what's the purpose and what's the situation of the series of tasks. If we look at the first task is an interpretive reading. There's always a can-do statement. And there's instructions in English and Spanish. So I'm going to open Voces and show you this assessment in Voces. And you can see that this is an email. So the instructions: your new teacher in Canada is Mr. Holder. He's very friendly and writes you an email with your new timetable. Read his email and the timetable and answer the comprehension questions. So you can see that this has the email format. And there's a timetable. There are questions which require the students to find relevant details. So the questions are always based on important information that the student would have to know, would have to understand to be able to reply to the email. Since this is early on, in the curriculum, you can see that there's some questions in Spanish. So what does Danny need to take with her? Who is Mr. Holder? Why is he writing this letter? So these are really important questions for the student to be able to understand in order to be able to reply effectively to the email. And then questions about the timetable. So the student really needs to understand the timetable and how they can use that timetable to choose their subjects. If I go back here, so a feature of all of the IPAs is that it will be an authentic resource, or it will be very close to an authentic resource. The purpose of the task is explained in English and Spanish, and the comprehension questions relate to information which the students would need to understand in the real world, not irrelevant details from the letter or from the timetable, but important details to be able to reply to the letter. And information feeds into the next task. So if we look at the next task is to reply to the email. Reply briefly to Mr. Holder's email, include the following: a greeting, thank him for his email, etc. So you notice that this is a real world task. It has a purpose and it has an audience. So you're not just, the student is not just writing a paragraph, they're replying to an email. And the audience, they have an audience, Mr. Holder, and they have a meaningful reason for that task. One of the features in all of the IPAs is that there will be detailed instructions in English and Spanish that help the student to unpack the task. So this is very important, because we all know as teachers that if we want our students to be successful, they need a lot of scaffolding, they need a lot of guidance. And that was taken into account in building these assessments. So not just reply to Mr. Holder's email, but give students some guidance onto what information will be necessary for a good reply. If we quickly go back to voces. So this is the interpersonal writing. So you see that there are instructions in English and in Spanish, and there's somewhere for the student to type in their answer. And there's a rubric. So Melissa showed you, or I think it was Hannah, showed you the rubric, and this will appear in the speaking and writing activities. So this is a great guide for the students, and it's also really useful for the teacher when grading. So when you grade, you can just click into which description fits the student's performance. The next task, so the third task that are all connected to each other, the third task is presentational speaking. Make a recording about your school and your favorite subjects and sports for Mr. Holder to share with your new classmates. And this is similar to the previous production type assignment, assessment. So there's lots of details given to the student, what they should add in their presentation. Say the subjects you study. Say the sports that students play at your school. So there's a lot of scaffolding given to the student to help them really be successful. And there's, this is nice, really nice for the teacher. So when the student goes on, they can use the platform to record. They don't need any other equipment. They can use the platform to record, and the teacher can also really easily listen to and grade the students' work. So this is really so convenient for the teacher, and it's a really fun activity for students. Here. So the interpersonal writing and the presentational speaking are real-world tasks with a purpose and an audience, and there's lots of unpacking to help the students be successful. So what are some of the features that have been incorporated into the IPAs, and what is the feature of an IPA? It's a summative assessment. So it's assessment that comes at the end of a learning cycle. The tasks which are in the IPAs you'll find in our Storyscape incorporate vocabulary and grammar that the students would have studied and practiced a lot in the unit. What's very important is that there are similar tasks earlier in the unit. So if the student needs to write an email in the IPA, they would have had to write an email in a previous assignment. There's a rubric, and the task can be completed in physical class or online. So the features that are part of the platform make it convenient for physical class or online. I'm going to show you again the Voices platform, and I'm going to show you how you can find material that will build up your students' skills. So if you go to the directory, you can see that each unit has a can-do checklist. So we're going to look at the can-do checklist in Unit 2. And these are what the student can do, what they do and what they can do throughout the different activities that they can carry out in the unit. So this is just related to Unit 2. And we can see here, interpretive reading, I can read a school timetable. So that was part of the IPA. If you click on here, you can see that there's another assignment, a previous assignment based on reading a school timetable. So you can make sure that you work with your students with this assignment as a really great preparation for the IPA. And the can do section can help you find, while you gradually learn what's there, can help you find that material. And then when you use this in the classroom, you can make sure that you focus on some vocabulary or some aspects that you know that students need to understand in the IPA. If we go back to can-do checklist, we can look at the interpersonal speaking and writing. We can see that students had to write an email to a friend to discuss my school vacation plans. So this is another activity which students can do before the IPA. And this would be really important that you give them a lot of feedback. That you give them a lot of feedback on these activities that lead up, that are the foundations to the communicative tasks in the IPA. So we realize, or you all realize as teachers, that the integrated assessment of the students' skills can be very motivating for students. It gives them the type of practice that they need to become better communicators. But how can we improve their success? Because they may seem more daunting. Sometimes a very traditional type of test can be not necessarily easier, but it can be more straightforward for students to prepare, and they may feel a little bit daunted by such an open-ended type of assessment. So it's really important that you give them the right kind of preparation. And also, as Melissa said, we're focusing on the communication and not always accuracy, but how can they communicate these different, communicate their ideas, and how can they be meaningful in their communication. So we want to grow their skills. We want to use those similar tasks that we find, you can find in our Storyscape curriculum, or you can create your own tasks that will scaffold their skills. You can teach strategies. So, for example, strategies that they can use to understand authentic reading material or authentic listening material. So like activating the schema, looking for cognates, using graphic organizers to understand the main ideas and details in a text, or using graphic organizers to plan a talk or an essay or blog. So work with your students, work through strategies with your students as you use the preparatory material. And you can also use more traditional grammar and vocabulary quizzes to review the general building blocks. And those grammar and vocabulary quizzes are also available in each unit. Then you can unpack the task and pre-teach specific vocabulary and grammar. So before you assign the task, it would be very important that you look through and decide what structures, what vocabulary the student needs, and see what you need to pre-teach. Although this vocabulary and grammar will be already incorporated into the curriculum. Then what about how you deliver the assessment? Well, you've got the context, and it's very important to, as you assign and work through the assessment, you ask students lots of personal questions. So have they ever been in this situation? Have they taken part in a student exchange? What sort of information would they like to know about students that they're going to visit? What sort of information would they like to know about the school? And I don't think anyone else has mentioned a really great feature of the curriculum is that it's fully editable. So when you look at a particular task, you know your students better than anyone else. So you can decide if you want to add a glossary to the assessment, if you want to add questions, modify questions, remove questions, and in the VOCES curricula, you can always edit, and something that's just going to be edited in your material. So that's very, very useful. And as you become more proficient in using the curriculum, you'll feel a lot more comfortable about editing. And it's something that I use quite a lot when I was using the Nuestra Historia in Spanish. Sometimes your particular teaching environment might need a particular type of rubric, or your teaching environment might require certain conditions, and you can always incorporate that into the material that's there. That's really very helpful, very useful. So I talked about lots of activities that are there in our Storyscape, but you probably feel you want to be creative and you want to create your own performance tasks, because maybe you know that your students are interested in a particular topic, or your students are going to make a certain trip, or your students have their particular age, their particular demographic. So once you're familiar with the type of structure, what an IPA should have, you can be creative and you can create your own tasks. So how do you go about that? First, you think about your theme and you brainstorm realistic tasks that would be connected to your theme. Then you need to find the authentic resources. So I'm going to show you also a few places where you can find resources. And you need to create activities to guide the students' understanding. So in the activities, you can think of pre-reading, during reading, after reading. Think of that structure that Lauren mentioned in using the stories. This would be the same in using the authentic resources, be they reading resources or listening resources. So activities which would help with vocabulary awareness, which would activate prior knowledge, and which would definitely focus on the purpose and audience of the task. So if you're providing your students with a menu, then they must use that menu for its natural purpose, to order a meal. If you're providing your students with a video about tourist information, then the natural use of that would be to choose activities that you want, choose places that you want to go on a trip. So always think of what is this resource used for, and try to incorporate that into your students, into the type of activities that you give your students to do, the type of task. So if we think of these three common themes: food, clothing, travel. For example, food, an IPA, an integrated performance assessment, might give the students a menu. They would have to read the menu, choose what they wanted to have, maybe depending based on certain criteria, vegetarian, certain likes and dislikes. And they would have to order the food from the waiter. And maybe you could have a third task, a writing task, to write a review. So does anyone want to come up with, do we have time, Erin, to break out?
You know what, unfortunately, we're running out of time. But so yeah, if you don't mind, just let's not go do a breakout rooms and to finish up in like the next 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So for example, if your theme were clothing, then one option would be you would give students a web page, and they would have to shop online. Maybe they're given certain requirements. Maybe they have to shop for going back to school, or maybe they have to shop for a holiday, and perhaps a writing where they need to return an item. So depending on your student's level, you could even take the same material and give different types of tasks, from more simple to more complex tasks. And travel, for example, an IPA could be you give the students a video, they need to watch the video, choose which places they want to visit, then book a trip. So that would be interpretive listening and interpersonal speaking. Great. So where can you find some of these authentic resources? I'm sure all of you have lots of ideas about that and lots of go-to places. YouTube is a great place to find public service videos, educational videos, recipes, how-to, ads. Then you can also keep a lookout for web pages that can be useful, like NGOs, online shopping, news and current affairs, official country or city information, schools, museums, or zoos. So it all depends on the level of your students, but you can always take something which is more difficult and give very simple questions. So questions that a learner coming across a page, what could they get out of that, which is very meaningful. Then you can also have both online or real actual brochures or posters or menus, infographics. And these types of authentic resources are used. There are lots of examples of those with activities in our Storyscape, and you can create your own. But what should you think about as you create activities, and as you choose? Use the resource for its intended purpose. Use age-appropriate material that connects with your students' interests. So depending on what your students are interested in, try to look for that kind of material. Also, what you think you could make them interested in if it's something that's unusual, fascinating. Then ask questions which will always focus on, what is this for? Who is this for? And tailor your questions. So the more difficult the material, the easier the questions could be. And you can also put the questions and instructions in the mother tongue. It's a good idea to keep a page that you just keep pasting some different sources so that you can always go back to the sources that you found useful. So what should you take away? So the IPA is assessment, a summative assessment. So it's used at the end of a learning cycle. It's always real world, purposeful, and they're motivating and fun for students to do. They will have 3 linked tasks: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. The student should practice and receive feedback from similar tasks before. So during the learning cycle, they should have practice and feedback from similar tasks, and you will find that those tasks are available also in the curriculum. You can edit any assessment to tailor it to your students. And you can also stretch your creativity with authentic materials as you become more familiar with how you can use authentic materials effectively. So I hope you'll try out some of the performance assessments in the next few weeks or months. And you could also try out some of the authentic materials too.